our moderator is the fabulous Drew Ann Love, who is like a garden angel for crime fiction and crime writers. She's a book blogger and a reviewer, recipient of the Raven Award from MWA, and a truly spectacular human being. Here's Drew Ann Love.
Hi guys, hope you can hear me and see me because I can't see anybody. Anyway, so we're doing the panel for the publishing landscape, and I will have all the panelists give a 90-second intro because my fear is I would forget something. So Jason, you can start.
My name is Jason Pinter. I'm the founder and publisher of Polis Books, an independent publishing company that I founded in 2013 after stints in editorial and marketing at Warner Books, which is now Grand Central Publishing, Random House, St. Martin's Press, and Grove Atlantic / Mysterious Press. Just this past fall in 2019, we launched Agora, which is an imprint that's dedicated towards publishing diverse and underrepresented voices in crime fiction. Our first list was nominated for basically every award there is: Edgar, Anthony, Strand Critics Award. I'm also an author as well. My latest novel, Hideaway, came out this past March. My new novel, A Stranger at the Door, is coming out in January both from Thomas and Mercer. I live in central New Jersey with my wife and our two daughters, 2 and 3. So you can imagine being stuck at home during a pandemic with 2 toddlers has been, with both parents working full time, has been interesting. But thank you all for coming, and I probably still have about 20 seconds left, so I will pass that over to the next person.
Paula.
Well, most of you know me, I think. My name is Paula Meunier, and I'm an agent for Talcott Notch Literary. I started off as a reporter, and then I was an acquisitions editor for many years, and then I became an agent. I went to work actually for my own agent's agency, the fabulous Gina Panettiere. And now I also write crime fiction, and my Mercy Carr series is out. Book 3 comes out next year in March. And book 1, A Borrowing of Bones, USA Today bestseller, and it won the Dogwise Book of the Year award. So there you go, if you like dogs. And it was nominated for the Mary Higgins Clark Award. Blind Search is out now, and I love crime fiction.
Cool. Dana.
Hi, I'm Dana Kay. I am the founder of K Publicity, and we are a boutique PR company specializing in publishing and entertainment. I'm also the co-chair of Murder and Mayhem in Chicago / online for the past 2 months. And I'm a lifelong reader and storyteller.
Terry.
All right. Hey, guys. I am a senior acquiring editor at Crooked Lane Books. Before Crooked Lane, I was at Midnight Ink Books for 10 years until they decided to shut their doors. And quite happy that Crooked Lane picked me up because it's a really good fit for me. And we are publishing a ton of books. We're looking at 100 books in the year 2022. So we are very, very busy and working hard. And you'll also see my cats as they pop up in the picture now and then. Sorry about that. And I've been a lifelong crime fiction reader as well.
Great, thank you guys. All right, so we shall begin, and I'm just gonna push out questions so anyone can respond. So my first question is, what do you find challenging in your role at the present time? Don't make me pick.
I think that there's challenging things, but also really wonderful things too. Like the wonderful things are also challenging in that the way we did things before has had to drastically pivot. So as the publicist, my role is securing media coverage for our clients and helping them with their events, their marketing, all these things. And so in some ways it's been really challenging because pub dates have gotten moved and media outlets have either closed or everyone's working from home. So we have to track down personal addresses of book reviewers. And so some of that is, am I echoing? I don't feel like it's my speakers though.
Okay, you're good now.
Okay. And so I think that's been, so in some ways it's been really challenging simply because we have to stay on top of everything, but at the same time, it's also been really wonderful, just like Paula and the coordinators were saying earlier, that this conference usually caps at 200, 250. And here we have, 250 here, but 700 people who signed up to potentially watch. And so there's also these other moments that are happening that are helping our authors reach a wider audience. So I think probably the most challenging part is just staying on top of everything. But I'm really optimistic just because people are reading more than ever. Books are being sold more than ever. This is in many ways really great time for authors.
Yeah, I just actually read something where I think it's what's the name of that company? Harcourt. Their sales have gone up. So a lot of book publishing industry companies sales have gone up, and because you're sitting home and the only thing you can do, besides watch television, is read a book.
And there may not be much television this year because not a lot of shows could shoot, right? So gotta get back to reading.
Anyone else?
Well, I would say I was on a panel at another conference a little while ago, and there's a lot of agents on the panel. We were all saying that, we have to work twice as hard to sell half as much. And I think that is true in some ways this time during this year. I think partly because, book sales are up, but a lot of it is backlist. And so for new and relatively unknown writers, it's been harder. Frontlist has been harder. So we're working just as hard, but we are making sales. And we have to adapt, right? We have to adapt to the new reality. And we're all struggling to do that, but we are succeeding and we are selling books. And it's exciting. We're not necessarily selling what we sold before. And so we have to make those shifts as the publishers make those shifts, right? So I think that's a cue for Jason.
I think from the publishing perspective, it was certainly a difficult time period because not only essentially starting in March did a very large portion of the industry shut down, a lot of bookstores were closed, publishers were readapting to everything. As a publisher, it really affected what we were doing because obviously we were selling books into independent bookstores and into libraries, and all of a sudden independent bookstores are closed, libraries are closed. So we ended up having to push back almost our entire spring summer list because they literally had nowhere to go. They wouldn't go into bookstores, they wouldn't go into libraries. So we're just now sort of starting to ramp up again into the fall and into 2021, but it really changed the way we published and distributed, and sort of almost like the film industry too. Nobody really knows what's going to happen 3 months, 6 months, a year from now. We're sort of hoping, things are starting to kind of come back to normal. But I think sort of piggybacking off of what Paula said, I think a lot of the sales do seem to be up. A lot of it is in children's books, especially with all these children home. People needed activities for the child. I know we bought more activity books for our kids than ever before. A lot of the sales are coming from sort of what you would call quote unquote marquee authors, tried and true authors. A lot of people concerned about their finance. A lot of people may have lost their jobs or been furloughed. If they may have spent $100 on books in 2019, now they're spending $25. And they don't want to take that $25 and spend it on someone they never heard of. They just want to spend it on a big name because they know what they're going to get. So I do think there's been a lot of strong sales for authors who are sort of already at a certain level. But for authors that are still trying to kind of make their names, it's very hard because there's been no publicity. Media's been covering everything from the pandemic to the hellscape that is in the White House. And it's been very hard for up and coming authors to break through that. So we were hoping is sort of to wait out the storm a little bit into the fall and into next year, that people's buying habits or reading habits are going to start to get back to normal a little bit, because we have so many incredible books and there's so many great authors. And I think from the crime perspective, one of the things that we were looking to do is that really push and promote authors whose voices and stories have not been heard before. Diverse authors across race, gender, sexuality, culture, society, everything. And there's so many of those authors out there, and to sort of have people go back to the normal reading patterns next year, to be able to discover these authors is exciting. So I hope that is able to happen.
That actually segued into my next question, which was, what are you doing different in terms of marketing during this time? And anyone? I mean, Jason already alluded to what he's doing different. How about you, Dana, Paula, Terry?
from the marketing side, I mean, I think that what Jason mentioned is that a lot of the mainstream news outlets are saturated with doom and gloom. And even a lot of our nonfiction authors who used to be really great for these national news outlets, now all of a sudden like, oh, is this related to the pandemic? Is it related to Trump? Is it related? Then no, it's not happening. All that being said, there's this huge siege of people at home creating content, people at home reading. And because of the internet, everyone and their mother can have a podcast, can have a book talk, can have a bookstagram, and so we've actually seen so much open up in a lot of these areas where the mainstream news outlets just don't have the space, quote unquote. And even the people we had a Today Show segment on Thursday, which is like every author's dream, right? To get a Today Show segment. I don't know. I have to talk to Simon & Schuster. I don't know if it actually moved books because it wasn't about the election. It wasn't about everything that was going on. I think people were really distracted. And they're like, oh, this feel-good segment about a memoir, I don't know if it's resonating. Whereas people who are interested in learning about books and learning about new authors are going to different media channels. They're listening to more podcasts. They're on TikTok a lot. We've had great success with TikTok and Instagram and some of these others, and YouTube. People are launching more YouTube channels. And so I think that there are plenty of people talking about books, and there are plenty of media opportunities for authors. It's just where those media outlets are and where we're pitching that's changing.
Cool. Interesting thing about this is that, I mean, where everything is changing and everything is being done during COVID or pre-COVID, the question becomes what happens when we're post-COVID, but that's not my question for now. One of the things, because we're doing the marketing, we're doing the podcast, the thing is now, and a lot of people are writing their own books and such, what are we doing for our writers that we have in our company and for the new writers? How do we retain the momentum for the existing authors, and how do we grab and get these newbie authors into this publishing industry?
I mean, I think that's always, that's not just a COVID question, that's an industry question. How do you introduce new authors to readers? I think in terms of right now, I think the silver lining of COVID is that it's forced publishers and publicists and agents and marketers to be a little more, I think, more outside the box. Even watching that video before, listening to Joseph Binder, who's fantastic and has probably toured all over the world, there's no touring right now. So all these avenues that used to be available even 6, 8, 9 months ago are not available. So when I see authors now, instead of a 20-city tour, they have a 20-city virtual tour, and they're doing interviews with every independent bookstore across the country. They're doing interviews with Murder by the Book, and they're doing a Poison Pen and stores in California, New York, and Chicago. And in a way, that's open to more authors than a traditional tour would be, because a traditional tour is going to cost thousands of dollars. A virtual tour costs basically nothing. So it allows us, and it's forced us in a lot of ways to think about more, even as Dana is saying, to sort of explore other avenues. Like I'm old at this point, so I don't know how the hell to use TikTok, but other people do, and there are a lot of avenues out there for authors who are willing to kind of experiment a little bit. But at the same time, there is still book review coverage, and there is still publicity, and there's still great outlets to get books covered in. And one of the great things about social media is that people can talk up their favorite books online. And I think word of mouth now matters more than ever. So we're still able to get books into the hands of people who can kind of spread the word and might have some influence. And that's become much more important now than it ever was, given that there's so much of this these physical avenues are just not there anymore.
Yeah, I would say, I would totally echo that, especially because I think the pandemic has forced a lot of publishers to be dragged kicking and screaming into digital marketing, right? They didn't do that much digital marketing,
Mhm.
but now they do a lot more. And it's something that writers can, take the initiative. They can help themselves. So I think that helps too, that it's not all on the publisher. You don't have to rely on your publisher. It's good if your publisher, has seen the light and is doing all these digital marketing things. But if they're not you can do it too, right? You can approach these podcasts, you can talk to people, you can do YouTube videos, you can do TikTok. So in a way, it's kind of a good news, bad news thing. The bad news is not a lot going on, maybe national media wise, especially for new authors. But the good news is you can do it yourself, and you're sort of obligated to do that. Hi.
I think another aspect to that question is publishers supporting authors long term. I think we almost need to treat this year for debut authors as if it didn't happen, right? Because if the book debuted in the middle of COVID, the sales were down way lower than what we had expected. So I think publishers need to eat that a little bit and continue to support them for book 2 and book 3, treating them almost as new books. And a lot of publishers won't do that, can't afford to do that. Authors get dropped because this is a business, but this is new times, and we have if we do them in that way in the future.
There's a lot of chatter in the chat about virtual events and virtual book tours. Is that okay if I speak to that a little bit?
Sure, go for it. This is you.
I'd love to hear what your experience with it is too. Bye, Paula. What I'm noticing is that when virtual book tours and virtual events were doing really well when nothing was open, now that things are starting to open up, depending on where you are at in the country, and then we have so much Zoom fatigue, it's getting a lot harder for people to want to sit on yet another Zoom meeting. Kudos to the 300 of you for doing it tonight with us. But I think what we've been seeing is that anytime we can make it more of an event versus a meeting, it goes a lot better. So we've had authors team up with musicians to do like a reading and a concert. We have another author, we're doing a vodka tasting alongside his main character drinks vodka. We're doing a holiday romance panel where they're talking about their favorite holiday cookies, and they're sending out recipe cards in advance of the event. And so to make it feel more like a party and more like an event and less like a meeting is what we've been seeing to work really well. You also really have to drill in the book buying. So you may have 100 people show up, which you would never, well, I shouldn't say never. Many of us would not have 100 people at a bookstore, but the ratio of how many people buy books is also a lot lower than the bookstore. So what you really have to do as an author or whoever's hosting the event really has to drill in, like, thank you to this independent bookstore for hosting my event. Please support them, and just you kind of have to be a little bit more, not salesy, but making the connection for people that you're not just online to entertain them, that there's a bookstore behind it and that you need to support them. So I think when you call it out, especially when the author calls it out online, that usually translates to sales a lot better. But I know that many authors feel so awkward being in that position. But I think with the virtual, when you go to a bookstore, it's assumed in many ways like that you buy the book from the bookstore, but on a virtual event, you have to connect the dots for people.
And it will be interesting to see where we go with that. Will we still have this virtual event, or will we go for the hybrid event, which is half in person and half virtual? So you kind of meet both groups in the middle. So giving people who can't like travel to view the same event, and those who can. This is interesting question. Of course, it's interesting. What are you looking for? And this is more for the writers and probably more for Jason and Terry and Paula when she comes back. What are you looking for in writers? And what do they need to become a client?
Well, sorry.
Go ahead.
From a publishing perspective, I'm looking for stories I haven't heard before. Can everyone hear me? Just my mic went out for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I would say I think the crime fiction landscape has changed more over the past 2 to 3 years than in the past 20. I started coming to events, I think it was around 2006, 2007. And it felt like there was a lot of lip service in terms of the industry wanting to open its umbrella and invite in more voices, and it never actually seemed to materialize. But I think that's changed a lot in the last 2-3 years. And I think from my perspective, I've read a lot of crime fiction, and it takes a lot to, for lack of a better, it takes a lot to kind of wow me. I look for authors who are doing something different, who are writing about an aspect of culture or society that I've never heard before, that are just have a voice I can't put down. It's one of those things like you don't know what you're looking for until you see it. But I would say I'm not looking for people that are essentially writing, they're trying to be the next Raymond Chandler, because you know what? There's a Raymond Chandler and there are 100 other people that have been trying to be Raymond Chandler. I'm not looking for people who are just essentially reinventing the wheel. I'm looking for people that are doing something different, something outside the box, that kind of have a bit of a higher aspiration. And after that, it's all about story and characters and plot. And if you write something fantastic, then I'm gonna want to publish it.
I would certainly second that. I think, when I first became an agent was maybe, I think, nearly 9 years ago now. And people were saying, oh, yes, we're really looking for multicultural stories. But they really weren't. It was, it was really hard to sell them.
And I got to say, I'm going to jump in with you too, because having been on the publishing side, there was this sense of like, you get in a book that maybe has a different voice, but then the publisher's like, well, we already have one of those. And it's like, you have 45 of this book, you can't have 2 of this book. And it's just, as a reader, it drives me crazy. So I hear your frustration on the agenting side.
Yeah, exactly. But, that really has changed. I tell people, right now, there's an open window now for people writing different kinds of stories about different kinds of experiences. And that's great. I don't know how long the window will remain open. So I think everybody
hopefully forever.
Yes, hopefully forever, but who knows? But the good news is now people are actually looking for those stories and they're publishing those stories. People like Jason, right, making such a difference, and that's fabulous. I do think that what used to work doesn't work anymore. I totally confirm and reinforce what Jason has to say about something different. And that's just typical marketing. You have to be able to position yourself against what else is out there. And why would they read, you're the next Janet Evanovich? Well, we already have a Janet Evanovich, right? So who are you? Position yourself against Janet Evanovich. You're Janet Evanovich, but what makes you different? What makes you special? And I think sometimes that just comes down to you, right? What about you is special? What about, your work is special? And you have to be able to define that. I know as an agent, if I can't pitch a book in 50 words or less, I can't sell it. It's come to that, and I think that's why you hear so much talk about high concept. But what high concept, it really doesn't even have to be, crazy, die hard. It just has to be, what makes your work special, and can you articulate that? And does the promise of that difference, is that promise fulfilled in the execution of the novel?
And my question is, and it's backing on what Jason mentioned earlier, is right now we're having this whole conversation within the publishing industry on diversity. So how are you addressing that from your role? Like, how is it helping you move the needle this way, move the needle that way? Can you talk about that a little bit? And like I said, we already heard from Jason, but if you want to expand, Jason, you could.
Well, we literally, sorry.
Go ahead, Terry.
Oh, I was just going to say, for me, I don't feel that my acquisition strategy has changed very much. Me being me, I've always been looking for diverse voices. And unfortunately, we haven't had a lot of that. So this is a really exciting time, I think, in publishing as an acquiring editor, because we're seeing more of those submissions come in now. And I'm taking on some that I wouldn't necessarily have taken on before because they're going to require a good deal of developmental editing before it's ready to go. But we're willing now to take that time to work on those books to give some of those voices a chance.
I mean, we literally launched an imprint for that reason. We launched it in our first list came out in September 2019. Our first title was John Virtue's 3/5, which is about a biracial man who grew up essentially passing for white, who is involved in a hate crime, and essentially has to reevaluate his own identity. It was nominated for the Edgar Award, Anthony Award, Strand Critics Award, Lefty Award. And we started that imprint, I think, because for a long time, every publisher was saying, we want diverse voices. We literally said, we don't just want diverse voices, we are literally creating a home for diverse voices. And I think that made a huge difference because it made people feel more welcome. Going to events like New England Crime Week, but also BoucherCon and Thriller Fest, I think everyone who's been to these conferences notices that they can be kind of homogenous. And I, maybe that's a little cynical because I'm a straight white guy in publishing, but at the same time, as a reader, I want to read stories I haven't read before. I care about the industry and I care about what people are bringing to it. So we went out and literally put our money where our mouth was and said, we are creating an imprint. This is a home for these kind of voices and stories. We are going to get behind it and spend a lot of money promoting it. And the response has been fantastic. And the amount of submissions we get from authors and agents. And one of the things that was important to us was that we were be open to unsolicited submissions because there's so many diverse writers out there who just don't know the business side of the industry for various reasons, not all of which are their fault. So we want to make sure we had the door open to anybody who wanted to submit to us. And that was sort of our way of saying, like, we don't just want diverse voices, we're literally creating a home for these voices, and we're going to support them to the best of our ability.
Yes, I think Jason is certainly to be applauded because that was fabulous, and it really has. He really did sort of provide, put his money where his mouth is, and not that many people were willing to do that. I mean, from the very beginning as an agent, I've represented writers representing diverse voices, and it was much more difficult to sell them 8-9 years ago. It's easier now because people are actually looking. It's like they discovered something new. It's like been there all along, people, but they're finally getting around to to publishing those diverse voices. And then some of my most successful clients. And so I'm always looking for more great stories, people who are writing about something. And a lot of times what these writers representing diverse voices, not only do they have a different voice, but they're writing about something. And I think that's a lesson for all writers, is write about something, right?
That's what I like about it, is because, I mean, as a reader, it's always, you just pick up a book and you read. But for me as an African-American woman, it was so great to pick up a book and go, wow, oh, she got the same skin tone as me, we're good. Or the same dialogue, the same slang. It's like, wow, I can go into this. And you know what? You think about this, if you can get one person to read a book that is like them, just imagine the other books that they would pick up that might not be like them, but it is there. So the whole diversity and which way it goes, it's great. Definitely don't want it to be a fad. We just want it to be something that's moving on and forward and being truthful and delivering what it needs to deliver.
Yeah. I mean, it like the fact that we have to have a diversity conversation in and of itself is maddening. Exactly. Because like this should just be like, this is a definite, this is here. It is not like, well, we need to be more diverse. It's like, no, the world is diverse. If you are not publishing for these readers by these authors, you're not doing your job. And I think that's a big part of it, is that it should not even be a conversation. I mean, it has to be because we need it to. I think the hope is that however long it takes, it's just, this is the industry. These are the writers. These are the readers. You don't have to have a conversation about anything because you're doing your job and appealing to the world as it is, not the world through like a very small lens.
But it's also the system. I mean, it's how our publishing system works. That's quite, it's not broken. It's just, it doesn't lend itself. So if I know some of my clients are here and they'll tell you I'm a systems nerd. So something's not working. I'm like, let's find where it breaks down. And if you look at how most traditional publishing works, agents receive submissions, publishers receive submissions from agents, and if you, so it's very like a one-sided thing. And, you know, a lot of agents and publishers, no one's attaching a headshot or like a sexual orientation card to their manuscript, right? But it's all very inbound. And as publishing is mostly white people, men and women, but white people, there's going to be a certain amount of like, oh, I know this person and I know that person. And the networking aspect means that everything, a lot of the things you're getting are through connections, that if you are not actively seeking out putting yourself in rooms with people who don't look like you or love like you or move through the world like you, then you're not going to have, it's going to be a lot harder to get those like inbound submissions. And so by what, like Jason, what you said about by like saying, here's our house, here's this door, it's like, that's great to open it up. But then there's also a lot of active outreach that needs to be done to reach different communities of writers that don't necessarily look like us. Because even like you said, Butchercon is quite homogenous. Most writers groups, most creative writing programs, like there's lots of systemic breakdowns. And so I think this actively looking and actively seeing people and finding the writers who are telling stories, because like you said, they're everywhere, but they may not have the same connections to, they may not know about Agent Query or Publishers Marketplace or all these things that we, because we are like networked in, had access to. And then the other piece of system breakdown, so we've always represented diverse people. I live in Chicago, like there's lots of really diverse writers here. And so it's always been, as a queer person, I attract a lot of queer writers. And so, but the other breakdown that we were seeing was that we were getting submissions from a lot of great authors, but because their publishers didn't believe that their books would sell as well, they were getting lower advances. So writers of color, queer authors, authors with disabilities get statistically lower advances than their cis white counterparts, able-bodied counterparts. And so we're not cheap. Like, I mean, just to be frank, like hiring a publicist is a significant investment. And so that's where we were seeing the breakdown is, okay, how can we provide, if this publisher is not paying good advances because they think the books won't sell, then the author can't necessarily afford a publicist. Therefore, they won't have that extra publicity push. Therefore, the books won't sell. It all starts coming around again. And so one of the things we launched, finally, not launched, but one of the things we've decided as a company is that if there are underrepresented voices in publishing, and it's a project that we would want to work with, it's a book author we want to work with, a book we want to work on and can stand behind, that we will take them on and do a full campaign regardless of budget. So we've done that a few times, and we've done something, and the community has been really great in helping with fundraising efforts and other ways that we've allocated funds to that. So that has been a really great thing because we've seen, obviously I'm not sharing who our authors are, but like we've seen some really great things happen for these authors, and they're selling books in a way that I don't know that they would be selling the same amount of books if they weren't working with us.
Yeah, that was my next question was, how do we fix that? And that's a great example. Thank you, Dana. But yeah, how do we fix that? How do we work to reach the people? How do we work to reach everybody? Because everybody who wants to be a writer deserve a chance to have their story told. How do we get there? How do we get there?
I know one thing that several conferences are doing are scholarships, so that people who can't afford it can start going to conferences and meeting people. But Joanne, that's really a question I've had for a long time. How do you level the playing field? If you're having to work 2 jobs and you have 3 kids to support and they're being homeschooled now because of COVID,
right.
How are they going to have time to write? How are they going to be able to connect? So there's a massive amount of privilege in writing. And so I don't know the answers. I'm hoping scholarships will. I hope just seeing books on the shelves will give people the motivation or courage to send their manuscripts out, to know that there might possibly be a place for them. And I think we're talking about it. I think we keep talking about it until we don't have to anymore.
I want to tell one story that I think relates to that a lot. So this past summer, Thriller Fest, as everyone knows, went virtual. I, along with my company, Polis Books, partnered with international thriller writers to essentially start a scholarship program for aspiring Black crime writers. And we raised over $20,000 just devoted towards scholarships for Black crime writers. But it wasn't just that. So I want to give a little bit of a story. In August, which is right after the scholarships went out, and I think we were able to raise like 300 or so pitch sessions for Black writers to pitch agents and editors at Thriller Fest. A writer named Aaron Clark reached out to me just to say thank you, because he was one of the writers who got one of the pitch scholarships. He pitched an agent. He actually just signed with an agent. About a month ago, he sold his debut novel at auction. So this is an author who got one of the scholarships from the money that we raised for Black scholarships at Thriller Fest. Through that pitch session, signed with an agent. That agent then sold his debut novel at auction. So obviously that, like, I'm not saying you do it necessarily everywhere, but it's taking active measures, not just saying we'd like to do this, but how do we do this? What organizations are out there to partner with? What other writers' conferences, writers' groups are willing to essentially take the lead and work with us to do that, to not just like, say we want this, but to make outreach, because like everyone has said, not everyone knows how to make connections. Not everyone's active on social media. And there are probably some fantastic writers out there who are writing in a room somewhere and don't know who all the influencers are on Twitter. And if we can somehow get word to them to say, we are going to make this available to you, and if you have the talent, we're going to respond to it. I think that's something that we have to do as an industry. And I think I think that's happening more and more.
Yeah. The Eleanor Taylor Bland Award, which is a Sisters in Crime initiative, is another really good one for crime writers of color.
I think several of the Reader fan conventions have like a grant program or a scholarship program to reach out to people, but and like Jason mentioned, it's the connection. How do you get that person that's in that room typing their little manuscript to know about this stuff? And that's what we have to do more of, is reaching out to the public. I have one last question. I think we'll do a answer some questions. What is the one thing you would tell a writer who is new to the business or already in the business? What is the one thing you would tell them moving forward? And this is more right now during the pandemic, during, post.
Well,
I would tell them, keep writing. There you go.
Yeah, write a good book, focus on the craft, because I always say this, you can have $1 million, you can sell 1 million books of book one, but if it's not good, they're not coming back for book two.
Yeah, and I would say that during this time, since nobody really knows what's going to happen, and nobody really knows what's going to sell. I mean, there are certain things we know that will sell, but a lot of things that we traditionally sold haven't been selling. And so I tell writers, look, write the book you've always wanted to write. Go for broke in terms of big idea. Go for broke in terms of pushing yourself to the very limits of your craft. Go for broke, because now, since there are no guarantees anyway, now's the time to write that book you've been secretly wanting to write all along. And then send it to me.
I would also say not to give up. I can tell you that as acquisitions editors, we are buried under submissions. I think everybody who had a book in their drawer has suddenly sent it out, and we're seeing so much, and we are overworked, and we can only read so many hours a day, people. Like there's only a finite amount of time that we can acquire, right? So you can't give up. I mean, it's a very long and slow process for a lot of writers. That doesn't necessarily say anything about your writing. You can write the best book in the world, but you have to find the right editor at the right time when the publishing house is looking for something like that, right? So don't give up. It's hard, long, but be encouraged by your friends and readers and the community to keep going.
I would say that publishers are looking for authors more so than books. So if you've written a book and polished it and edited it and you're querying it, you should already be working on your second book. Because if somebody, an agent or an editor, is interested in that book, they're going to want to know what you have coming up next. Not to mention this entire querying and submission process can take months and months and months, if not a year or more. A lot of authors, publishers, and agents want to know, like, if they're going to invest time and money into your work, they don't want it to be a one-off. They want to know you have another book coming up and another book coming up, or an idea or a series. So always be thinking about what comes next. It's weird to think about if you're an aspiring writer, but once you get an agent or once you get a publisher, you run your own small business, and you have to think about it like that. If you're running a store, you don't only get supplies for that. You think about, what am I going to sell in year 2 and year 3? Because if you're only thinking for that first 6 months or year 2 is going to come, you're like, wait, I have nothing to offer. So always think about whatever you're working on, always think about what's coming next.
All right, so I got a couple of questions. Let's see. This one is deep. Is it true that now an author cannot include characters that are not just like themselves? Cannot have a character that is, say, gay if the author is not gay, or a person of color if the author is not a person of color? That's a perplexed question.
A protagonist?
I think that's
Yeah. That's the key. It's your point of view, right? So if you're a white guy who's 75 years old and you're going to write a teenage Black girl, that's a no-go, right? You don't have an experience, you don't get that understanding, don't do it, right? But then again, think about your life. When I go out my door when I can and it's safe, I don't encounter just everybody who looks exactly like me, right? So our books need to reflect our reality. But you can't take somebody else's experience and write it as your point of view.
Well, and I think that's what it is. I think it's like depending on what kind of book it is and why you're choosing. I think men can write women and women can write men. I'm sure that there's plenty of gay authors who write straight protagonists, and plenty of, I think it's also like why you're choosing that point. It's more of an internal question of like why you're choosing that point of view. And also, is this a central part of the character's experience? Like, are you, like I think that's a big thing. So protagonists, the point of view is tricky. If you're, like Carrie said, if you write all white, straight male characters in the world, then that's boring and not real and not authentic, because that's not how our world is. But the protagonist is the tricky part, and I think the question is like, why do you need to tell this point of view? How important is the character's race, gender, identity, anything? How important is that to them? Because I know there's plenty of authors who, I think that's the question, is like, why are you compelled to do it?
I would say you have to include other perspectives. You have to, otherwise you're not writing a real book. I think the difference, as people said, it comes to protagonists versus kind of secondary characters. In Hideaway, for example, one of the main characters is a gay Black woman. There are minority characters. I think the difference is that people look at now versus what they looked at even 5, 10, 15 years ago is that if you're going to write a character outside of your own purview, you got to get right. There's much less wiggle room. If you're going to write a gay character or a Black character or a Hispanic or a Latinx character, they can't be a caricature. They can't be just, hey, I saw this movie and I'm going to make it sound like them. You got to do your homework. And I think also if you're going to write about a certain cultural issue that's really sensitive, whether it's, say, like Black Lives Matter, if you're a 75-year-old white guy, you probably should not be writing a book that whose central theme is Black Lives Matter, because that is not your experience. When I think about books that I'm writing, there's certain things that I know that's not my story to tell. This is somebody else's story to tell. So you really have to think about, if you're going to write a story, why is this particular story yours to tell? And it may very well be, but I think when it comes to issues of diversity, you need to have diverse characters. This isn't even a question, because this is the world. You have to have diverse characters, but you have to do your homework. You have to get them right. You have to be sympathetic and empathetic. And you have to think about, is the story that you're telling one that you have the right to tell?
Yes, and I would add that it's very hard if you don't do that. fastest way to get rejected is to be seen as writing something that is not your story to tell, right? So you need a multicultural cast of characters, but you have to be very careful about the point of view and whose experience you're writing about, internally, right? From your, and that's important because, nobody's going to go there anymore. That's old thinking. That's, so let go of that, right? I have to tell all kinds of people. I'm still surprised at how many people how many guy writers I have to tell not to describe the woman's breasts. That's all, in our first look at a female character through his point of view is about her breasts. Like, really, guys, it's 2020, knock it off. So it does matter, and it can keep you from getting published. It will keep you from getting published faster than anything, practically.
Yeah.
And something else to think about too, because I think there is this, so Jason, I agree with what you're saying in terms of you need to have diverse characters because this is the world. But then there's also authors who are going to put in diverse characters because they're I just need diverse characters. And, you have to think about also why are you putting them? What if you're going to name them as Hispanic or gay or Black or whatever, if you're going to name them as that, why? How is that impacting the story? How is it enhancing the story? How is it telling something about the characters? And then I also feel going back to authenticity, crime writers love researching. Crime writers will go to the morgue, they'll go talk to cops, they'll go, they'll do any of that. So if you want to write Black or Latinx characters, maybe go talk to some Black and Latinx people.
Yeah.
Or go sit and listen to, go sit and I do speak Spanish. I love sitting. There was this one Cuban cafe down the street that I love sitting and listening because no one thinks I speak Spanish, so I can eavesdrop on people. And I loved listening to these old guys who would come meet for coffee every day, and the way they talk about their grandkids and the way they talk about work. And you can go and just put yourselves in these rooms and research just as you would researching the dialect of firefighters or how different government agencies work. You just have to listen and put yourself out there to get that authenticity.
Next question is, have you seen more genre crossover with mystery?
Well, let me just say that the hardest thing to sell is something that's half of this and half of that. So it needs to work. Genre crossover is great when it's integrated and it's not just half of this and half of that, because that's almost impossible to sell. So yes, there are people, there's Outlander where she creates a whole new genre, or Gregory Maguire, creates a whole new subgenre. But that's very tricky craft-wise to pull off that sort of integrated approach to a brand new subgenre. So you have to be very careful about that and make sure that you have integrated this when you do a hybrid genre, that it makes sense and that it works still. Otherwise, it's a quick pass because it doesn't appeal to the readers of either genre that you've combined.
Cool. I actually don't know how long we're supposed to keep talking because the timing is off, but I'll ask another question. Is there any market that you feel is oversaturated at this time? I'm gonna pick somebody.
That's a tough one. I mean, I want to think that there's always room for any books that people want. As far as, I think anytime a big trend comes along, everyone tries to publish into that trend. So when the Da Vinci Code came along, there were 100,000 sort of religious Indiana Jones-ish sort of crossovers. When 50 Shades of Grey hit, there was 80 million sort of books along those lines. When Gone Girl hit, sort of domestic psychological suspense became the big thing. I don't think there's any market that's saturated right now, but I think there's always a concern that if you're going to start writing something, don't write into the trend, because by the time you finish that book and try to submit it or query it, that trend might be dead. So just write the book that you want to write. write the book that is not out there and you want to make it out there. So just don't write into it. If like some new book comes out and sells 5 million copies, don't then be the sort of 5th generation facsimile of that book. Write something that write the book that 5 years from now, other books are going to compare themselves to yours.
I'd predict not to write a pandemic novel.
Yes.
Oh, please,
Yes,
no.
That's my
No.
prediction. We have a few
Yes.
that are coming out that were written before, poor souls. But I think that's going to be, there's a lot of people in their writing cave right now, perhaps writing pandemic thrillers. So I would say just maybe don't do that.
Keep it in the cave.